My name is Tom Lounibos. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called SOASTA. So let's get into it. As we do this, I'm gonna take you through a retrospective. I want to take you back 10 years to just give perspective to what we're doing today in terms of application development and design. Back in 2001, I was running, oddly enough, I was running one of the first SaaS-based application companies in the United States. It was the largest financial services SaaS company. It ran the mortgage industry in the United States. So 70% of all the online mortgages that were done in the United States went through my system. But they went through, my company was named Dorado, but no one knew the name Dorado because my customers were Chase Manhattan, Bank of America, Wachovia, all the largest mortgage brokers in the United States used our technology to push things through. I was unique in 2001 being a web-based application. There was Mark Benioff for Salesforce.com was one of the first SaaS companies that came out. The majority of the company or applications that we had in 2001 were actually used internally for enterprises for call centers and sales and HR and finance, and they were particularly client-server architectures. What made them easier, testing has never been easy, but what made these particular applications a bit easier to define performance was we deployed them all inside of a firewall on a static infrastructure. LAMP stack usually is what we used in this environment. And you know, as we deployed them, our end users were employees, and this is the distinction I make often around the world is, you know, for 33 years, whether it was back in the mainframe days when I started back in the 70s, or into the client-server age, or now into the web, the first generation web applications, we built applications for our employees. And this is an important distinction when you talk about performance, because when applications failed or hardware failed, the end user that actually had to deal with the failure was on your payroll. You know, they were sales reps, call center reps, finance folks. That's how we built those applications back in the 70s on mainframe computers or in the client server side of the fence. And the numbers, although in some cases in 2001 ranged into the 20s and 30,000 of employees, for the most part, most companies had thousands of employees and not the type of folks that we see today. Also, as we built these applications back in 2001, you know, our versioning was usually 3 or 4 times a year. And if we were a mature company, we actually only came out with a new version once or twice a year back in 2001, quite a bit different than we see today. And again, the impact of these things when they did fail, and they did fail. I think I remember back in the 1990s when I was running another company and an application that we had failed. And we got a lot of notoriety, and the notoriety made the press, but the press that picked it up was the computer world. Today, an application fails, it's in the London Times or the New York Times, and that's why we have to prevent the kind of performance issues that we see. But to some extent, at least for me, performance in the 90s for client-server applications was a bit of an afterthought. Testing was a bit of an afterthought. We tended to look at it as something we had to do, but in terms of where we hired, we always hired new developers to actually build the applications. That was far more important than hiring the tester to test the applications and such. All that's changing. The traditional test approach that we used, you know, since 1989, when Mercury LoadRunner was introduced, and think about that. 1989, Mercury LoadRunner was introduced, and it's still, in 2011, is the most dominant testing tool used. And one of the things for us in the Silicon Valley, there's a phrase we use that we believe in term limits for technology. We believe in it for politicians too, but I think term limits for technology means that, you know, we live in a valley of innovation, and innovation is that those cycles are usually 6 or 7 years. In some cases, it's reduced to 2 or 3 years. But when you have a vendor that has done a terrific job, by the way, Mercury Interactive is a terrific company that was acquired by HP in 2006, but it's been the dominant player since 1989, and that's amazing to us. And when you look at a business model from a venture capitalist perspective, there's always reasons for the lack of change. usually the business problem doesn't exist for requiring it to change, or innovation would have actually led that change much sooner than 1989 or 2011. But the way we tested these client-server apps and the way we test the first generation web apps was usually a 4 to 6 week test process, because the Mercury Interactives, the Rationals, the Silk types of tools that have been around for 20, 30 years are script-based environments, and they were manual by nature. You wrote scripts to build the test. Any kind of changes to the applications, you have to change the scripts as you went by. And on top of that, the deployment of the servers in your test lab also took a lot of time to set up and prepare. So testing itself took about 4 to 6 weeks, and also that allows for the time that it took to analyze the result sets that came out of them. Test labs was where we tested. And the largest test lab in the world that I found was at Sun Laboratories with 200 servers in the back room. And when you think of performance testing, you can only get, depending on the application, about 100 users, maybe 200 users per server. So our limitations were the server size. The majority of us that were testing client server or web applications had 10 to 20 servers in a back room in a lab. So test labs were always behind a firewall and were limited in scope. The cost, the reason why, there is a dirty little secret for the first generation of web application providers like I was. And the dirty little secret for Web 1.0 and Web 2.0 applications is we didn't do performance testing. And so our consumers actually became what we call in the States digital test crash dummies. We literally allowed our consumers, we've had a couple customers actually over the last 5 or 6 years say, we knew we had a problem not by our monitors, but when the phone started to ring in the call centers. That's when we began to understand we had performance-related issues. But cost was associated certainly to licenses. Mercury Interactive is very expensive. Rational was very expensive. Silk was very expensive. For a 4,000 virtual user license in the United States, it was about $1 million in cost just on the software. So we were limited in terms of any number of tests that we would do on the license prices itself, and then we were limited on the hardware side as well. And then people and finding people and retaining people was the other area of it. One of the things that attracted to me, and my background is not testing. My background is building companies. I've built 6 companies in the United States. I've taken 2 of them public. We had $1 billion cap. The first $1 billion cap on NASDAQ was a company I started back in 1985 called KnowledgeWare, and then we took a company public in 1999 called Sagent. And in all these cases, the companies that we started are limited in terms of how much money you actually have to spend in this area. But the thing that attracted me to the test marketplace was I hadn't seen this kind of a market in 10 years. The ratio. It's a $59 billion market. I was really shocked to hear those numbers. I'm not sure of whether or not those numbers are actually correct. These are IDC numbers, and everybody has a little different version of the numbers. So it's not as important to me to whether it's 59 billion or 50 billion or 40 billion or 20 billion. The ratio was what was important to me when I looked at this marketplace. Of the 59 billion, 49 billion of it is people. It's a very manual process right now, which is good in some ways for this market, but bad for people that are dealing with business agility issues, where you're literally pushing out new revs of applications much, much quicker than we do today. So if you tested, you only tested 1 or 2 times a year, and that was the problem of the last really 35 years in performance testing. Let's fast forward to 2011. So enterprise applications now, for the most part, they become our sales and marketing channels. As we've emerged, especially after a recessionary period, instead of building bricks and mortar in the United States, as we're expanding throughout the world, if our companies are expanding, they're using the web as a channel more so than we're using bricks and mortar, opening bricks and mortar stores around the world, especially in China and different emerging markets like India and Brazil. And it is becoming far more important that this website is up and running because it is your sales and marketing channel, because if in fact the site is down, it's affecting your P&L as a company. The web architectures we use today, we don't really build internally monolithic systems like we did in the 70s or 80s or 90s. We assemble applications today. We assemble applications from external components and internal components, whether the external components are content distribution networks like Akamai, or pricing engines like PayPal, or components that we build inside. It makes it, on one hand, very fast and agile to build an application. On the other hand, to deliver performance, problematic. End users now are consumers. So we have impacts now of customers coming to sites, of thousands of folks coming to a site, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands, or millions of users within a short period of time, and burst in terms. Creates a new version of our software twice a day. And it's just the new order of things because we're not driven by a test or a dev process. We're driven by a requirement of the marketplace that is our consumers. And consumers, there's one company that I'll give you an example to, and I'll use lots of customer examples as we go through this presentation. There's a company based in New York, which is now, it's an amazingly small company. It's about 200 people, and it's $1 billion company. And it's all the internet. It's called the Gilt Group. And the Gilt Group is a retail company that auctions excess inventories twice a day through an auction process on their website. Gucci bags and excess inventories on the high net worth areas. And folks go on and bid on these excess inventories. They change their inventory 3 to 4 times a day. Retail industry used to change inventories 4 times a year by seasons. So the marketplace is changing because the distribution channel is changing and the market itself is changing. The apps and infrastructure, when they fail now, an apps and infrastructure, just like in the 70s and 80s and 90s, fail at different points. But when they fail, now the impact is huge. Now the impact's on the front pages of the New York Times, and it's actually being measured more and more in terms of lost business. There's a number I'll show you in a minute, but Amazon.com, one of the largest e-commerce sites in the world, when they have 100 milliseconds of latency on their site, this is their numbers internal. 100 milliseconds is that, we just had it. When they have that kind of latency on their site, they estimate they could lose up to 1% of their business on that page for that moment. For the last 12 months, there's been a buildup to go to the website to buy tickets for the Olympic Games. And the website will open up at this date at this time. That's called event-driven marketing, and get used to it because everybody's doing it right now. And so the big push here, and when you combine event-driven marketing like the Olympic Games with social media, that's when all hell breaks out. Because now you put Twitter and Facebook on the front of these, and I'll give you some examples as we go through. Enormous traffic begins to hit the site, putting enormous pressure on all of us trying to deliver performance through these websites. One of our bigger customers, you may or may not know Netflix in the United States. Netflix allows you to stream or download movies live and up-to-date movies like The King's Speech and others down to your PC. On any Friday night, the Netflix community uses up to 33% of all the capacity of the internet. On any given Friday night, one application uses up to 33% of the entire capacity of the internet because it's video. And so it just crushes it.